Today we're going to be taking a look at not just one, but two lenses, two 50mm lenses from Light Lens Lab. These are essentially reproductions of vintage lenses, so that's what Light Lens Lab does. They reproduce lenses that aren't being made today, basically following the same optical design, but they're brand new lenses coming right off the production line, which is a pretty interesting concept. So when they reached out and asked if I wanted to try these lenses out, I said that would be awesome. I love checking out different M-Mount lenses, especially something like this. It's kind of unusual or just not that common to see people doing what Light Lens Lab is doing. So we're going to be taking a look at two of their 50mm lenses today. And a quick disclaimer just up front, I am not keeping these two lenses. I've been testing out these two prototype lenses. I'm sending them back to Light Lens Lab as soon as I'm done with this video. They're not paying me to do this. They're not telling me what to say. They're not going to preview this video before it goes live. So everything I share here, it's just going to be my unbiased opinion, as it always is when I do this kind of thing, but still just wanted to get that disclaimer up front. For starters, this is the 1966. Basically, it's a reproduction of Leica's 50mm f1.2 Noctilux that they released in 1966. Leica actually re-released this lens a couple of years ago, but it's going to be considerably more expensive than Light Lens Lab's version, which this lens, this is the black paint brass version. This is going to retail for $22.99, which is still a lot of money. However, it's going to be less than buying even a second-hand used version of the original vintage 1966 Noctilux, and I think that's really where the appeal of what Light Lens Lab is doing, basically reproducing vintage lenses. You can still buy vintage lenses, but you're going to be dealing with glass that's been around for a long time. It's probably seen a lot of use, and trying to track down a clean copy, especially if they're rare, you're going to be paying a good price for it. Whereas these are lenses that are being made today, brand new, and they're just following that same formula. So you're going to get the same look that you would get from that lens. It's just going to be in a brand new housing with brand new glass. This lens is not a reproduction of the 50mm rigid Summicron like you would expect just by looking at it. They went with this design, but it's actually a reproduction of a cinema lens from the 1940s, the Speed Panchro 2. When I first got this lens out of the box, I assumed that this was going to be a copy of the rigid. However, after shooting it, I realized this doesn't look anything like that lens. I recently did a video on the rigid Summicron, and I could tell it was very different, and it also focuses up to 0.7 meters as opposed to 1 meter like the rigid is. So just to make that very clear up front, this isn't a copy of the rigid. It's the Speed Panchro lens. It's a cinema lens from the 1940s, and they also have it in another housing. However, I think just because so many people love this design, they decided to also release the same lens with the rigid housing. I've been testing both of these lenses out on the Leica M11, and I will say that both of them have a lot of character. They're reproductions of vintage lenses, so it's what you would expect. These vintage lenses have a very distinct look, and this was my first time using the Speed Panchro lens. I had tried the original re-release from Leica, the 1966 version of the Noctilux, and it has a lot of character. The Speed Panchro lens itself, it is like overflowing with character. Wide open at f2, this lens is very, very glowy. This is not a general purpose type of 50mm. In my opinion, it's not something I would use all of the time. There are plenty of 50mm lenses that you can shoot wide open and get clean and predictable results and still have a little bit of character. This lens, in my opinion, is not one of them. If you stop either of these two lenses down, they're both going to get sharper, and I think the 1966 is going to be just sharper all across the board, whether it's wide open or if you're stopping down. However, if you do stop the lenses down, they both do lose some of that glowy vintage kind of look, and they look to be a little bit more of a typical 50mm. But in my opinion, if you're buying these lenses, you're going to be buying them specifically for the look that they give you, often shooting wide open or at least close to that. When I use lenses like this that have that signature look wide open, it tends to put me in like bokeh hunting mode, you know, where it's like I'm shooting everything wide open and I'm specifically looking for subjects where, oh, that's going to work shooting wide open, where I can just completely melt the background and there's like 1% of the photo is actually going to be in focus, which isn't really how I like to shoot. That kind of feels like when I was, 15 or 16 and I first learned what aperture meant and how it worked and realizing, oh, I can just have everything out of focus, and that looks cool and neat. I typically like to stop lenses down and get a little bit more depth of field, and I think when you do that with lenses like this, you are going to lose some of that signature look that these lenses are going to give you. The 1966, I've noticed, has a very distinctive flare to it. I was shooting photos of Nora out in the front yard, and despite having a hard time getting accurate focus shooting at 1.2 while she was running around, just shooting into the light as the sun was setting, it has a very distinct flare. And despite not being general purpose 50mm lenses that I would personally use every single day, I understand the appeal if you want a very specific look that you're going for, especially the Speed Panchro lens. It just is unlike any other 50mm that I've ever used. Whether you want to have a really stylized look for photo or video, I could see what the appeal is for lenses like this just to kind of have in your arsenal. And again, I think the price, being able to buy a brand new lens for less than you would be paying for a vintage lens, it makes sense in that regard. But results aside from these lenses or really anything Light Lens Lab is making, I just find it really interesting that there's a company out there basically reproducing lenses that were already made. They're just not being made today. So lenses that are going to be rare or really expensive, being able to buy something brand new, I think it's just an interesting concept. I don't know, what the lens patents are like, whether you're allowed to reproduce some lenses and others you aren't, but I feel like this kind of thing opens up a lot of possibilities for lens manufacturers, especially Light Lens Lab, since they seem to be doing a very good job. I don't know, I'm just interested in this concept in general. I'm curious where they're going to go from here. And I'm also interested to hear what you guys think. If this is something you would be interested in, or if you would rather go for like the original vintage version. I'm curious to hear what people think of something like this, but I've had fun trying them out. So big thanks to Light Lens Lab for letting me try these out. I'll be sending these back tomorrow. That's going to do it for this video though. If you guys have any questions at all about these lenses or thoughts of your own, again, I'm really curious to hear what everyone thinks of this concept. Leave them in the comments down below and we'll keep the conversation going. But that's it for today. So thank you guys for watching. I love you, and I'll see you next time.